Celebrating an anniversary. I love you too, my dearest, I said, as I shook my head ruefully and clicked the cell phone off. I always forgot. Each year I told myself I'd remember the next time, and then I'd forget again. Until it became an accepted tradition for me to forget, and I just rejoiced in the surprise, guilt-free, every year. This saga started way back when I was a medical student. In med school, I soon discovered that 24 hours were woefully inadequate for a single day. I was always either hyper-alert or dead asleep. The learning curve was like the trajectory of a rocket. We worked around the clock, constantly studying, learning, observing, listening. We were always tired, always hungry, always sleep-deprived. We depended on our batchmates for life itself, yet the competition amongst us was cutthroat. The stress levels were stratospheric, and even though I lived at home, I was struggling. I just worked and ate and slept. And I commuted. On my two-wheeler, it took about 20 minutes between home and hospital in traffic, but much less late at night or early morning when I usually made the journey. I was dashing home early one morning for a bath, a change of clothes, a feed, and a quick nap if I could squeeze it in. I'd been on my feet since the last forever, in the same sticky clothes, and all I'd eaten was the insipid pap at the hospital canteen, and I'd passed exhaustion and fatigue, and even beyond fatigue, hours ago. As I turned the corner in the pre-dawn murk, I saw him come off the curb, stepping off without bothering to check, safe in the presumption that no one else would be out at this ungodly hour. Black running shorts, orange t-shirt, orange day-glow sneakers, the leads from his headphones floating in the updraft as he powered off the pavement with his long, muscular stride. He never heard me coming. He never saw me coming. I saw him, but there was no way I could react in time. The moment I saw him, he was already in front of me. I can still feel that smack, like a punch to my own body. I can still hear the hideous thwack and crunch. I can still see him flying through the air, twisting and tumbling as he went, black and orange, landing on the unrelenting road, rolling twice over and coming to rest on his side with his limbs unnaturally splayed. I can still hear the screech of the two-wheeler as I brought it to a savage halt, and the crazed shriek that rose out of me. As I became aware of that, my brain slipped into gear again. A shutter slammed down inside it. The screaming girl was gone. The med student was present. That's the only way I can describe it. I tossed aside the two-wheeler and ran to him like a mad person. Two joggers surfaced out of the gloom. I yelled for them to summon an ambulance as I skidded into a kneeling position beside him. I called to him, lying broken in the half-light. I'm a med student. I'm going to try to help you. I started checking him for vital signs. Breath, shallow and jagged. Two fingers groped for his carotid pulse. Shit, I couldn't find one. Several simple fractures, blood everywhere, eyes unfocused. I'd done CPR on more dummies than I could count, but this was the first time I'd really needed to do it on a human. I rolled him carefully onto his back and checked his airway. No obstruction. Good. His chest, no broken ribs, thank God. Tilted his head into position and started the chest compressions with both hands. His chest felt tight, tighter than any of the dummies we'd rehearsed on. I could hear one of the joggers talking to the ambulance team. How long? I asked him. He pumped his fingers at me twice. 10 minutes. I was singing Staying Alive in my head. We'd been taught to pump the chest to that rhythm. Right hand on left, find the exact spot with the heel of my hand, interlace the fingers, lock the elbows, kneel upright, pump, 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 tiring, left hand on right, pump, 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 tiring, switch again and again. I couldn't give up. I couldn't hand over. I'd caused this. I had to see it through. He was inert. We could hear the siren wailing long before the bloody thing appeared. They had him secured on a stretcher and into the ambulance in the cliched 2 shakes. They signaled a thumbs up at us. He was in safe hands now. One of the joggers blurted out, "She's a med student." And the guy said, "Well, she's had a good start because she likely saved his life." Did anyone see how it happened? The other 2 were just starting to say no when I croaked out, "He stepped off the curb listening to his music. I hit him." The joggers snapped their heads towards me. The ambulance guy took a good hard look at my face under my helmet and his eyebrows shot up. "Those earbuds have a lot to answer for, but you, young lady, have likely paid your dues." The double doors slammed shut and they were gone, siren getting fainter and fainter as we 3 stood there in the growing light. The other 2 melted away without a word, and I picked up my thrown-aside 2-wheeler and limped home, nervously second-guessing every corner all the way. I won't get into the events of the next few days, mostly involving mental and physical collapse. A dark night, and then a dark day, then a few more dark days and dark nights of the soul, with that broken young man's image never more than a blink away. The upshot of which was that I decided I had no right to aspire to doctorhood. I must give up medicine and try something else. It crushed me, but I couldn't see any other way. After days of sleeplessness, pacing, and innumerable baths, fruitlessly trying to wash the blackness out of my mind, I fell into a stupor-like sleep that lasted over 24 hours. Ignoring my parents' entreaties and the unanswered messages and calls on my phone, I hauled myself back to the hospital. Better to get it over as soon as possible. I don't know how I was functional. My mind was completely fractured. It was now close to a week since I'd last been there. As I entered, I was told to report to the dean. I was ushered into his room and felt a nervous chill whoosh through me. I waited till he looked up and then declared my decision to withdraw from the program. He asked me why, and I confessed everything in a great gush. The overwork, the exhaustion on the way home, the slow reaction, the excruciating result, and the unworthiness to put myself forward as a healer when I was actually a killer. What I discovered from him was that the ambulance had brought the victim here and that he was recovering well. The world span, and I almost fell out of my chair. He'd survived. I'd never even considered the possibility. Not only had he survived, but he'd actually got off quite lightly. A few broken bones and quite a lot of blood, but by the time they'd got him to the ER, his lungs had been clear, his pulse stable, and it was routine. The ambulance guys said they'd inherited him in good condition because of the emergency aid he'd received, and one of them had identified me as the aid giver, though not, it seemed, as the accident causer. The dean had just learnt that from me. My eyes widened. I'd confessed at the scene. It turned out the victim and his family wanted to thank me, and the dean dispatched me to be thanked. I took my relief and my guilt in both hands and left. He was alive. It was incredible. He'd looked broken beyond repair. It was early, but a nurse took me along briskly and introduced me as the one who saved your life. His right arm and leg were in plaster, all hauled up on pulleys. His face was dark from unshaven stubble and purple with bruises, and there must have been many more bruises that I couldn't see. Mother and son's thanks were so profuse before I could even open my mouth that I felt like a complete fraud. I waited till they fell silent, and then I confessed that I was the one who'd hit him in the first place, and that I was consumed by the guilt. I was so relieved that he'd come out of it okay, but seeing him like this and knowing I'd caused it was twisting my innards. But he interrupted to say he'd already told his folks it was entirely his fault, that the rider had been blameless. It was his regular jogging route. It was very early, still dark. There was never any traffic. He'd been listening to music, too damned confident that he was alone. He'd not looked around the corner, and whoever had hit him could never have seen him coming. He'd been unbelievably stupid, and he was just bloody lucky to get off so lightly. He smiled ruefully at his mother, and she wagged a finger menacingly at him, but she was smiling fondly through it all. As per the ambulance guys, he'd been given CPR on site by a med student. He indicated me with his left hand, and that had made the big difference. I was going to be great at saving lives. His mum patted my arm as she added her thanks for saving her son's life. He was an idiot, running blind and being a danger to himself and others, but he was her son and she valued him nevertheless, idiot or otherwise. They were joking. It was simply too much to take in. I thought I'd killed him. He was clearly alive. I considered myself guilty. He declared me innocent. I said it was my fault. He insisted he was responsible. I maintained I'd broken his arms and legs. He claimed I'd saved his life. I stumbled out of the room, utterly bewildered. The nurse informed me that the dean had summoned me back. I don't want to hear any more whining nonsense about giving up medicine, young miss. You better go straight back to your class. Immediately. You've indulged yourself quite enough as it is. Now get on with it. He rapped at me when he could take the half-minute away from his papers. That was the drama bit. The rest was quieter. I visited him in his room fairly often during the time he was there, when I could snatch a few minutes away from the studies I was back at. We became friends, and more than friends. Then more than friends. Perhaps I saved him, but he saved me right back. I went on to become a saver of lives as he'd predicted that day. I've seen innumerable broken bodies, put many together, again successfully, but had my fair share of failure too. None affected me as hard as my brush with him. Perhaps I was too young, but more likely, he's too special. He's the light of my life, the song in my heart, and the joy I look forward to at the end of each exhausting day. And every year, on a certain anniversary, never indicating by word or gesture in the morning when we are together, he unfailingly phones me at the hospital and catches me sometime, somewhere, to thank me yet again for saving his life. And I thank him for saving mine. The fire still burns. The fire snapped and crackled in the stone grate. The general smoothed his moustache after every sip from the wide-mouthed balloon glass and looked down into the valley where the lights of the town shone. He shrugged off his jacket testily. "Do you really need a fire all day, every day? It's not yet that cold, man." Doc swirled the amber liquid in his glass, feeling himself pulled into its depths, worlds within worlds. It must have been 10 minutes before he spoke. Charan was my best friend. I thought his marriage would be the end of our friendship, for which new wife wants an old friend around? But Mihika was an exceptional woman. She accepted me in the family, no questions asked. They had just the one child, a girl, Tarika. Mihika poured herself into that child. Perhaps she sensed she had only a little time and much to instill. She was gone before Tarika's 14th birthday. That left us two crusty men to raise a girl at a stage when she most needed her mother. We muddled through, and Tarika grew into a lovely young lady. And then Charan died too. I would have done anything on earth to comfort Tarika, but she turned to Bharat, a colleague, and not to me, whom she'd known her whole life. Charan and I had misjudged the intensity of their friendship. Within a year, they were Mr. and Mrs. Sharma. My small bachelor pad had always been just a place to sleep, since I spent all my free time at Charan's. Now, I threw myself into my work, keeping my practice open later and later at night. I was discreet enough not to visit the newlyweds unless invited, and phoned her only once a week. How this may have continued, I don't know. But in only the second year of their marriage, one night, extremely late, the doorbell was rung frantically. I'd returned just a half hour previously, so was still at my light dinner, but the imperious doorbell in the silence of the night demanded attention. It was Tarika. She'd hardly ever visited me there before, but she burst in with old familiarity. She was crying hysterically. "I've killed him! I've killed him! What am I going to do, Dr. Uncle? He's dead! I've killed him!" The bolt of fear that shot through me, I cannot describe. But I stayed calm and asked her to tell me what had happened. They'd had a fight. He'd said some ugly things. She'd pushed him. He'd hit his head against the frame of the door and gone down like a fallen tree. There was blood all over the floor. She'd panicked and run straight to my house, just a few buildings away. I could breathe again. It wasn't a gunshot or a knife wound. He may be all right, which meant she'd be okay. I said I'd check. She was to send me his doctor's name and number on my phone, make herself a cup of tea, and sit tight till I returned. He was still out cold, though 15 minutes must have passed. Pulse was strong and steady. He was definitely alive. So she was safe. Now, as to him. He was lying in a pool of blood, but there didn't seem to be any fracture of the skull. The crack on the head must have felled him, and he must have slammed his nose on the floor. That would have caused a severe nosebleed. It wasn't life-threatening, and luckily he had fallen face forward, or choking would have achieved what the fall hadn't. My phone rang. She was hyperventilating. I assured her that it was just a nosebleed, omitting to mention that he was still unconscious. Had she sent his doctor's number? I reminded her. She hadn't, but did it right away. I knew him casually and called and outlined the case. He offered to send an ambulance and have him hospitalized for 24 hours as a precaution. I agreed to wait till the ambulance arrived and as soon as it left, so did I. She was still extremely agitated when I got back. She resolutely refused to go either to the hospital or back to her home. She was evidently in shock. So I made her that cup of tea and gave her a sedative. While the sedative took effect, she filled me in on the details. The cause of the quarrel, it turned out, was me. She'd wanted to invite me for dinner. He'd said no. Once a month was his limit. She tried to explain that I was like a father to her and that such restrictions were odious. But he'd snorted derisively and made what she called for the second time some very ugly remarks. I didn't query further. All this may be normal in a marriage, what would I know? She pushed him, he hit his head, you know the rest. The sedative was kicking in, so I ushered her into my bedroom and settled her down for the night. With the confident entitlement of this whole generation, it didn't even occur to her to dimmer. I cleared my recliner where I usually did my late-night study, pulled out a thick bedspread to use as a cover, and settled myself down for a watchful night. The next morning, I would drive her to the hospital so they could start repairing the breach between them, and I'd make myself scarce for a while. But I must have fallen asleep, for I woke to the doorbell with my specs still on my nose and the reading light on. I was shocked to find the husband at the door, Bharat. I couldn't believe they'd discharged him. He should still have been under observation. He may be concussed. When I said that to him, he sneered nastily and said, "Yes, I knew you thought you'd be safe today. That's why I insisted on discharging myself. Made me sign tons of forms. Now, where is she?" "Safe from what? Or from whom?" I asked, simultaneously indicating the bedroom. "Where did you sleep?" he flung at me. Angered by his crude insinuation, I snapped back, perhaps unwisely. "This is a one-bedroom house. Where do you think I slept?" "I warned her about you, but would she listen to me?" "That's gross, Bharat," she said. "He's the only father figure I have left. He loves me as a child, not the way you're suggesting." "Seems I only succeeded in driving her into your bedroom, you filthy lecher." How I controlled the tide of fury that swept through me, I cannot say. I was on the verge of knocking him to the ground again. But for her sake, I stepped out of his path and let him enter. Whether he noticed that one side of the bed was unslept in, or that my paraphernalia was on the chair, I cannot say. For he marched to the bedroom, pushed open the door, and collapsed on the doorstep. These muscle-bound fellows sometimes take their bodies too much for granted. But a knock on the head is still a knock on the head. After a quick check, I called his doctor back, who organized another ambulance. He'd jeopardized himself with this ridiculous bout of jealous fury. He'd need more careful monitoring now. I roused Tarika and forced a cup of tea and some toast into her, as I had every intention of dispatching her with him in the ambulance. From that day, I withdrew. I didn't want to cause further marital discord. She was too precious to me, and her happiness was all that mattered. We had occasional phone chats. Birthday and anniversary visits were unavoidable, but I arrived late and left early, citing work. She protested about that, but I paid it no credence. She suspected Bharat's jealousy had driven me away, and she strove to shield me from him, not knowing I'd heard his ugly accusations at first hand. But the really ugly fact, General, that I needed to shield her from was that Bharat wasn't entirely wrong. I have always loved Tarika. Her father never saw it. Her mother may have, but she wasn't there. Bharat was sensitive enough to see into my soul and read there my blackest secret, yet not enough to see that I'd always smothered my burning affection for her and given her only what she was willing to accept from me, an avuncular friendship. But once I saw that I was a terrible blight upon their relationship, I knew that I must remove myself. It had to be managed tactfully. She shouldn't get even a whiff. I brought in a suitable young doctor to run my flourishing city practice. Built this cottage up here in the hills, always intending to use part of it as a clinic. I gave out invitations to visit me here in the summer, but made it plain they'd have to stay in a hotel since there was no room in my cottage. Their marriage thrives. Him, I don't know much of and don't care as long as he keeps her happy, which he does, which is all that matters to me. I work all the hours God gives to fill the days with activity, and I survive on my memories and knowing I did the right thing. But memory is a poor substitute for life. My heart is in cold storage, and that's why that fire must burn in the great day and night to remind me that I'm still alive. Maybe tomorrow. Thank you, Vikram. You have been most cooperative today. I couldn't ask for a more accommodating and obedient patient. If you continue this way, we'll quickly begin to see big improvements. Huh? Said Vikram, looking blankly at RC. What on earth was the man prattling about? Yes, distracted but cooperative. You were elsewhere in your mind today, and since you were not focused on resisting me mentally, as you are every day, your body obediently followed my instructions. So it has been a most fruitful session. See you tomorrow. And Vikram, best you go off wherever it was tomorrow also. Your body and I get along fine without you. RC laughed at his own joke as he prepared to leave. Wait, RC, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Burst out Vikram impatiently, still disoriented. He'd been distracted during today's therapy session, that was true. And all this talk of resistance and cooperation was boggling him. I've been telling you for a long time that you're physically ready, but your will is blocking your progress. You have to trust me and submit to the regimen. Haven't I said that to you 100 times? Vikram nodded in agreement. Ravichandran was an excellent therapist, his hands having as much power to soothe as his pushing manner had to anger. He always carried an air of positivity. On his own bad days, and there'd been plenty of those, that attitude had been particularly galling. And though RC was only there to help him, he'd often been uncooperative to the point of hostility. However much RC told him he could be better, he wouldn't let himself believe it. He wouldn't let himself hope. He'd lost too much. Despair and depression were his constant companions now, his faithful bedfellows. And hope was a dangerous interloper. What if he should befriend it again, and it were to let him down again? No, he couldn't go down that black path again. Whatever small island of peace and solitude he'd put together, it had been hard fought for, and he wouldn't let RC or anyone else bring those crazy tempests back to its shores. And so he'd been doing exactly what RC said, resisting him with his will. Today, the block was gone. You've been looking out of that window the whole time, and your mind is out there somewhere, too busy to be here, blocking your body. So I took full advantage of the situation and ran a small test. Every movement has been performed successfully and promptly, and your body and I have made huge strides. I've confirmed what I've been saying all along. So, I don't want you here tomorrow or any other day. You can put your mind out of the window and go off wherever you want to. And after a few months, I will return your body to you in good working order. Confidence rang in RC's voice, and his eyes positively sparkled with triumph. Vikram could see that he meant all that, and it was throwing him for a six. His body and good working order. Was it achievable? He couldn't verify any of RC's claims since he wasn't aware of the last hour. Yet RC's glee told a story that needed examining. But hope was a destructive demon. Good working order? Was that really possible in practicality? Or were they just placatory words spoken by an able-bodied man? He had to admit that wasn't RC's usual style. He'd never been one for platitudes. He never muttered useless nothings like, "It will be all right," or "Don't worry," or any of that meaningless claptrap. He'd always maintained that it would take a combination of technology, his own therapeutic skills, a great deal of hard work from Vikram, and above all, his positive will to achieve the target. But that it was a target that was within range given those circumstances. And he'd berated Vikram for not engaging that will, for not trusting, for not giving the therapy a chance. He didn't have the courage to hope. Good working order? Was it possible that a time would come, with effort, patience, skill, technology, and diligent cooperation, true, but that it could come, when his body would once again obey his commands? Each day of 24 torturous hours had become a misery to endure, and each tomorrow a torment to be dreaded. Into this dark bastion rode RC on a white charger, offering a treacherous hope. Could he again have the life he'd had before, which, seen from this bleak, black, bottomless hole, had been a miracle that he'd not even thought to appreciate? It was inconceivable. He didn't hear RC leave or acknowledge his farewell. His focus was still partially outside that window. Where was she? She was late. He'd only ever heard her voice every evening at around this time. She must live nearby. Her voice. It filled his head like a bird, like a sparkling river, like a cool breeze fresh from the mountains. It rang with something that was now gone from his life. And that something had swirled inside his head every day from the first day he'd heard her, and he'd hated that unknown something and the person who brought its dangers back into his safe, dark cocoon, till it had steadily worn him down, and he'd given in and sat himself down at the window today, looking to get a glimpse of her, to see if the person matched the voice. He'd heard her respond to Ganpat's greetings. He'd heard her asking after Dadaji and Dadiji. That was his Dada-Dadi. And sometimes she asked about Ganpat's wife and daughters. And she spent some time every day petting the dogs he'd deduced from the whining and crooning sounds he'd heard. Every once in a while, she didn't come for a few days in a row, and he'd started to observe a pattern before he even noticed he was doing so or that he was listening for her voice. After an absence, he'd hear Ganpat ask how she was that day. And she'd always say that she was much better, thank you, and change the topic or play with the dogs. Better from what? He'd just started asking himself. To which, of course, he had no answer as yet. He didn't even know who she was. All this happening just outside his window, and willy-nilly he'd found himself drawn into the intrigue. Who was the mystery girl with the bright voice and the sunny temperament? Where did she live? And what did she do? And what ailed her, making her worse and better periodically? He could hardly ask anyone that would unleash untold havoc. So he decided to try to find out for himself. And then RC had chosen exactly that time to make his appearance. Naturally, he couldn't tell him he was unavailable. And so he'd gone through with it. Physically present, but mentally out at the front gate apparently. Which seemed to have brought RC great joy. He finally acknowledged that it was too late for her. She wouldn't be coming. He felt an inordinate disappointment. Perhaps it wasn't one of her better days. As he pushed himself, mentally and physically, away from the window, it dawned on him that after a long, long time, he was feeling a flicker of something other than frustration or rage. It was just curiosity, he reassured himself, nothing more than that. But he had to admit it was a change. All right, maybe tomorrow. Cherished. My heart swelled with joy, and I feared it would burst the confines of my spindly chest. It sang and danced and frolicked in my breast, and later I was to wonder much at this. But for the moment, I was pulled along in a rising vortex of exhilaration, flooding my senses with warmth and love and yearning, and an overpowering sense of being deeply cherished. But perhaps a better place to start the story would be at the beginning. My friend, Sheru, had invited me to an exhibition of clothes curated by her daughter, whom I had known since before she was born and whom I held close in my heart. The clothes were created by Sheru's niece from Delhi, and the two cousins were taking the show to a number of cities, with one handling the fashion angle and the other handling the business side of things. I'm not very fashion conscious, picking and choosing what trends I follow. Plus, I'm modest and should be at my age, don't you think? I accept that sometimes I look matronly because I don't take too many risks. I'm the kind that wonders if some people even possess a mirror, since they wear such wildly inappropriate things. And I can't stand that mutton trying to pass for lamb look, with grandmothers vying with their granddaughters for God's sake. So no question of plunging necklines revealing crepey décolletage, dark unmentionables under flimsy blouses, or visible panty lines, which last, in case you wondered, just means looser pants, not those ridiculous thong things. From which diatribe you will have guessed that I'm not the ideal person to invite to fashion exhibitions curated by one's daughter. If I go to these things at all, I try to look inconspicuous and leave quickly, all of which is well known to Cheru. But nevertheless, she insisted I come, and with Meena being the curator, I could hardly say no. Though she tried telling me I was not to, I felt obliged to buy, and this filled me with dread. Another fine mess I'd got myself into is the line that ran through my head as we drove up. I was praying I would get something suitable. Bless you, my darling, and I hope it's a hugely successful show, I whispered to Meena as I enfolded her in my arms. She whispered back that I wasn't to worry about buying anything. She and Cheru had just wanted me to be there. But she did hope I'd like the clothes, because they really were very good. I felt my insides clench with tension, and perhaps my outsides clenched too, as she burst out laughing and told me to run along and play nicely, the cheeky scamp. Cheru was busy being hostessly, so I spent some time saying hello to sundry people before finally turning towards the clothes racks with an air of entering the lion's den. I was impressed, in spite of my apprehensions. The clothes were elegant and feminine. They were well worked and finely finished. The seams were smooth, not taut and puckered. There were no dangling threads and uneven hemlines. They looked expensive, but a furtive glance at the price tags indicated they weren't prohibitively so. And I'd been told they accepted orders, which made everything possible. I felt the strain ebb a bit from my body. I decided I might as well enjoy the experience and was leaning in, touching the garments and feeling their fine texture and workmanship. I moved along the racks, stopping, admiring, actually considering if I should order this one or that, or perhaps that other more genteel one, or startle myself by ordering that really very smart, though quite inappropriate for me, one. I slid the hangers along the rack, more than a little surprised that I was actually having a good time. I heard Cheru call my name and turned around to find her hauling a young lady towards me. Must be the Delhi cousin, I thought. And so it turned out to be. I congratulated the young girl and told her how much I liked the clothes. Cheru hooted with delight and told her that I was a very tough customer, which, sad to say, I am. And if I was pleased, she was home and dry. I was telling her which ones I liked, and she asked, "Have you seen the coats?" And I told her I hadn't, but in our hot tropical climate, I hardly needed one, and it would be a sheer waste. All the while, she was chattering and ushering me along, when suddenly my eyes fell upon this rapturous red coat. And all at once I completely understood Wordsworth and how he felt about those golden daffodils we'd studied about in school. My heart sang out. It danced and twirled and swooped under my ribs, thrilling me with an excitement that left me breathless and gasping with a delirious happiness, and a tender sensation of being dearly loved. The coat was so gorgeous that everything around it was in a haze, and I could see only this and nothing else. I rushed towards it on fairy feet, now dragging the Delhi cousin along in my wake. I saw my hands tremble as they reached out towards the coat. I already felt embraced by it, cocooned, comforted, and loved as a child in her mother's arms. It felt softer than an angel's kiss, finer than spider silk, and I wanted it fiercely. It just had to be mine. I had never felt this way about clothes. My mind told me it was just a coat with Chinese embroidery. But my heart told me I would rather die than give it up. I touched it, gently, just barely skimming my fingers over it, and felt it suffuse my body with unnameable, fluttery emotions. I could smell a deliciously familiar fragrance, and I buried my face in the softness of it. I was completely bereft of words. It was an overpoweringly pure sensation, a kind of soft, sweet ecstasy. I don't know how to describe it. It was overwhelming. The cousin got swiftly into the act. She'd taken the coat down from the stand and helped me shrug into it. I felt like I had come home, and I would have just stood there like a moon calf for ages. I could hear her in the background muttering away something about it being from an old pattern, but I wasn't really listening. She had the matter entirely in hand and hustled me gently to a mirror. Her fingers plucked and nipped and tucked at the coat. It needed a little taking in here and a shortening there. She pulled out pins from her sleeve and started sticking them into the coat. She was very skillful, for in a few quick jabs, she had converted the coat into a custom-fitted garment. I stood there, looking at my reflection and thinking how heavenly it was and how fortunate I was to have laid my hands on it. She showed me the price tag and acknowledged it was scandalous enough to make a sailor blush. But I was entitled to a very special and secret 20% off. She needn't have bothered with that discount. I could no more have let go of that coat than stop breathing. Sheru rushed across urgently to whisper that I didn't have to buy the most expensive thing in the whole show. Where was I going to wear it in our winter? I had a hard time convincing her that I wasn't doing her a kindness. Meena gave me a crushing hug and called me a real trooper. Only the cousin noticed my reluctance to surrender the coat, even for alterations. I put down a small deposit, all I had at the moment, and promised to bring the rest when I collected it the next day. She assured me it would be a perfect fit. But it was already perfect, to me. I had a few customary hors d'oeuvres and went back into the salon and glanced at the blue coat they'd put up instead of my red one. Cha, not a patch, if you'll permit me my say. And finally, I was on my way home. As the thundering emotions ebbed, I wondered what had come over me. To pay a minor pasha's ransom for a coat I could hardly ever use? Immediately, another part of me rose up like a fiery demon ready to defend my choice. Well, I could afford it, and I was going to have it, I reassured the demon, restoring peace inside my head. I had to admit that I really wanted that coat. It made me feel very special, not just glamorous and elegant and stylish. Somehow loved and adored and cherished. And how a coat could do all that was more than I could say. So I collected it the next day, and it fit perfectly, hugging me with exactly the correct snugness. And I brought it home and laid it gently on my bed in its white muslin cover. I stroked it lovingly and tried it on in front of my mirror, and it had lost none of its magic at home. I only put it away because I had to, but I'll admit honestly that I often took it out and put it on, even just over my night dress, and enjoyed feeling special in it and smelling the delicious smell of love that always came with it. And so, when the time came to attend my great-nephew's wedding, knowing it's December and it gets cold here, I think you know what was the very first garment I decided to take along. The rest of my wardrobe had to fit around it. I'd taken off the muslin cover and hung it up on a padded satin hanger so the creases would fall out. I was methodically putting away all my stuff on the shelf they had cleared for me in the cupboard. It was lovely to be back in the bosom of our bustling family again. I was pottering away happily when my sister came bursting in, already berating me for tiring myself out or some other such thing. But she stopped dead mid-sentence, which is not like her, so I looked to see what had alarmed her. She was standing there, goggle-eyed, gawping at my beautiful red coat. I was delighted to see it had taken the wind out of her sails too. But she accosted me with big, burning eyes. "When did you get Mum's coat?" she asked in a jealous hiss. And suddenly, all the misaligned pieces fell into place. Of course, it was Mum's coat. Now everything made sense. Our Mum had had a red coat just like this with Chinese embroidery. I don't know what became of it because obviously this was not that very one. We two little sisters would see Mum all dressed up to go out with her high heels and exotic perfume and upswept hair, jewels twinkling in her ears and this gorgeous red coat. And we'd admire how impossibly glamorous she looked, not like the strict Mum who watched over us all day. And she'd call us and scrunch down on her haunches in her beautiful dress or sari and this marvelous coat and give us each a tight hug that lasted forever. I'd felt completely safe in her arms, folded in the softness of that silky coat, watching her enticing, dangling earrings engulfed in the gentle whiff of her perfume and her softly whispered, "I love you," in my ear. Dad would be standing by looking imposing and handsome in jet black, and he'd give us each a whiskery nuzzle before shooing us off to bed, and we'd scoot off, waving and blowing kisses at them. How could I possibly have forgotten all that? The coat had evidently called to me with the long silenced voice of my beloved Mum, with her kindness and sweetness. It spirited me back to my innocent childhood, where I was surrounded and protected by her love and Dad's, and knowing nothing of tragedy to come, and completely confident that the world was full of love and wonder, and that I would be forever cherished.